Good afternoon. Welcome to our roundtable discussion titled "The Future of Literacy is Digital." My name is Ki Vu, and I'll be moderating the first of a series of programs to discuss a vision of equitable education hosted by Benetech. Benetech is a nonprofit that leverages technology to empower communities and address some of the world's most challenging social problems in education, employment, and human rights. As a disclaimer, in addition to moderating this event, I also have the privilege of serving as a member of Benetech's Advisory Council. Benetech's education work focuses on solutions to support learners with disabilities and will certainly hit on this critical population. However, this roundtable is a broader conversation about the current state of literacy education in the US and the role that technology and digital tools might play in advancing outcomes in the future, especially as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. While the title, "The Future of Literacy is Digital," sounds declarative, I firmly believe there should be a question mark at the end, and I'll be pushing our panel to discuss both the promise and limitations that come with the new technology and digital tools. We'll explore whether the future of literacy is digital-centric and whether the implications of these solutions actually lead to equitable outcomes. Now, before we start, just a few housekeeping items. We're recording this webinar. Only the panelists on the screen will be recorded. Attendee audio and video won't be recorded. We'll be posting the recording and additional information later in the week on the LinkedIn event page. Attendees will be on mute during the event to ensure high quality sound recording and transcription capabilities. We have the Q&A box enabled, which is part of the Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to ask questions there at any point. Make sure to include your name and organization so that if we don't get to your question during the event, we'll do our best to follow up with you. If you're having any technical difficulties, please email events@benetech.com. And finally, our captioning today is provided by ACS Captions. You may turn your caption function on using the Zoom controls. You should have a CC or closed caption option, most likely at the bottom right of the screen, depending on your device. Aside from the Zoom transcript, you can also provide, aside from the Zoom transcript, it's also provided in the chat. All right, that's the housekeeping. Now let's quickly meet our panelists. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Millicent Smith. She's a supervisor of instructional services in Lenoir City Schools, Tennessee. Next is Brad Turner, Vice President and General Manager for Benetech's Global Education and Literacy Program. And last but not least, Tracy Weeden, President and CEO of Neuhaus Education Center, a nonprofit education organization that supports excellence in reading. So welcome to all of you. We're really looking forward to engaging with you and learning from you. Now, before I jump into the conversation with our panelists, I wanted to start with this quote. "Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets," and share some data about the results that literacy education currently produces in the US. This data is important because it provides context for a discussion beyond, I think, just certain populations, but want to provide overall context. So nationwide, only 35% of fourth graders read at or above grade level. And that's on the nation's report card, the National Assessment for Educational Progress. And we know what happens for youth who aren't ready to read at grade level, as they're 4 times less likely to finish high school. And the long-term implications are just as staggering. Approximately 85% of youth who come into contact with the juvenile court system are considered to be functionally illiterate. And what does that mean for them as adults? Well, a staggering 32 million adults cannot read, 14% of the adult population, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics. We know that literacy helps people escape the bonds of poverty and live longer. We know that people who are literate are more inclined to vote, take part in their community, and seek medical help for themselves and their families. What's more shocking is that we haven't really moved the needle in more than 30 years, despite the fact that knowledge jobs requiring some form of post-secondary education continues to rise. Here's another piece of data. This graph compares the US to other developed countries who are members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, on the PISA assessment in reading. Overall, the US is 21st out of 36 countries. But when you disaggregate by race, what you see is the reality of three Americas. There are very different results for white Americans who are near the top, right next to countries like Canada and Finland, compared to Hispanic Latinx students and Black Americans. As you can see, the racial achievement gap in the US is comparable to the gap between the top and the bottom OECD countries. Now, an initial reaction might be that, well, Black and Hispanic Latinx students are more likely to be low income, thus explaining the gap. However, this third piece of data tracks students in English language arts as they progress through one urban school district from 3rd through 10th grade. I won't specify the district, but we'll say that it serves more than 200,000 students. As you look at the legend, please note that we are not comparing by just race alone, Black versus white. But the orange bar actually represents non-low-income Black students versus the green bar, which is low-income white students. So your less poor Black students versus your poor white students. If you start at the top and look at proficiency rates in 3rd grade, you can see that they are about even. But as your eyes begin to scan downward, what do you begin to see? That's right. By the 5th grade, Black students have started to lose ground. And by the 10th grade, they are almost 15% below their poor white peers and around 20% lower than where they started as 3rd graders. Let that soak in for a moment. We're not talking about poor Black children who start out behind and never catch up. You can only imagine what their data looks like. For these students, they were at grade level proficiency in 3rd grade and then fell further behind the longer they stayed in the system. If you're poor, the system isn't designed to help you catch up. It's really only able to maintain the status quo. But if you're a Black student, regardless of your socioeconomic status, the impacts are even more damaging, where the longer you go through the system, the further behind you get. Unfortunately, this school's data is rather common and not the exception. Now, one might argue that the pandemic has had negative impacts on any number of educational outcomes, especially for students of color. And you would be right. But all the data I've shown you is data from either 2015 or 2016, well before COVID ever happened. And yes, COVID has certainly exacerbated the challenge. However, when I look at this data, I think it's clear that literacy education in the US hasn't been very good to begin with, independent of COVID. It also makes me wonder about whether technology in and of itself can solve what in reality is a systems problem. At the end of the day, we can't be satisfied with simply returning outcomes to pre-pandemic levels, because literacy education has always left too many learners behind. We have to drive towards solutions that have the potential to evolve or disrupt the system. So with that as the backdrop, I'd like to bring our guests into the conversation. Millicent, Brad, and Tracy, leading up to this, we've shared your professional bios already. So I'd like to begin by asking you to share something more personal about what brings you to this work. And then as you reflect on the data, what is your biggest takeaway from it? And one thing you're trying to do to disrupt the system?
I'd be happy to start, Kate. I would say the thing that you might not know about me is I'm the oldest of 7. And the reason I am so passionate about this work is that my parents overcame the dynamics of abject poverty. And I can say that literacy transformed our family tree. We are outliers on purpose. My mother, who was a struggling reader, made sure that we had the currency of the 21st century in our hands. She instinctively knew that would be a game changer for us. And so when I think about the neighborhood I navigated, I shouldn't be here today, but I am. And I'm not defined by any social construct that society has placed upon me as a Black woman. Literacy has created a place at the table for me, and I am determined to pay that forward for every boy and girl and every adult who needs that currency to find their place at the table. Otherwise, they can end up on a political menu, and that's unacceptable to me. So I'm honored to be here today.
And I'll share a little bit of a different perspective in that I was a high school social studies teacher. So though a lifelong educator, I didn't teach early literacy, but I have a nephew that's 24 years old, that his parents are my brother, who is a lawyer, who is extremely educated, married to his wife, who was also had advanced college degrees. But my nephew, who is very bright, very smart young man, very inquisitive, very creative, has dyslexia, and he cannot access, he can't comprehend and access text the way that he needs to. And he did not receive the instruction, the explicit and systematic instruction and intervention that he needed early on in his educational career as a 5, 6, 7-year-old child that was struggling to read mightily, who had very educated parents but had no idea how to help, didn't understand the science of reading back then. That wasn't something that was at the forefront, and so they tried their best to help him, but Sam struggled, and Sam is 24 today and he still struggles, and he made personal choices that were not good for him. He made a lot of poor decisions, and a lot of it came from his self-esteem, his discouragement, his feeling of ineptness. He didn't have confidence, and still to this day will make decisions that really keep him from realizing his full potential because he's embarrassed, or he doesn't want somebody to know that he can't read as efficiently and effectively as he should, or feels like he should be able to do. So that could have been fixed. That could have been addressed if the teachers he had the information, the data, the materials, the understanding of how to teach reading, how to teach that science of reading in a way that would address Sam's deficits and helped scaffold him and support him and allow him to be able to fully realize his potential and build his confidence as a learner. And so he is one of those students that a teacher may look at in their classroom and think he's going to be fine. He'll be fine. And he may fall through the cracks and has a lifetime of poor choices and a lot of deficits he has to overcome to be successful. So it's a little bit of a different story. And thankfully, we've been able to support Sam and help him. And he's successful now as a young man and has confidence and is happy again. He was a very unhappy student going through his educational career, and that was really sad. So I'm passionate about making sure all children, all means all, and we have to use our data, and we have to use our science, and we have to be continuous learners and researchers and accept and embrace best practices and change our mindset and how we serve students so that all students have the opportunity to reach their full potential. And I'm working every day to support teachers in that way. They grieve their process when they have to change as educators, but I feel like that's my job. That's my work, and we have to do it for all students. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Melissa.
So Millicent, I love your comments because we see that every day, where we see a teacher who says, I can teach that child to read, you're doing it wrong. And then they, go back at it the same way. We see students who, as you said with Sam, make poor choices, and it's not their fault, right? They see the page differently. The teacher can't teach them to read in the same way. The student falls further and further behind. The student gets a self-esteem problem. The student spends a lot of time in the office because they're in trouble a lot because they're trying to make up for what they perceive is an inability to read, and it's totally different. And so I came from a family of educators. My mom was an educator. My sister continues to be an educator. As Benetech works around the world, we see that, for example, 75%, Key, your statistics were pretty staggering. Let me throw a couple others out. 75% of students with disabilities in India never attend an educational institution in their life. So, we talk about 35% aren't reading at grade level in fourth grade. In other countries, in Africa, 35% of students with disabilities never attend school. So it's a huge problem around the world. And I believe that technology, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but that technology is an equalizer for students, especially students with disabilities. Now, is it a great equalizer for all? No, because now all of a sudden you're introducing a different place you can have a divide. But when you put technology, and we see it daily, when you put technology in the hands of students with disabilities, you give them a way to read. They see the page differently. Some read with their eyes, some read with their ears, some read with their fingers. Technology enables that for every student. So it becomes an equalizer where if you hand a student who's blind or a student with severe dyslexia a book, a printed book, they're like, wow, this is a nice paperweight. This is a nice boat anchor. It'll weigh my backpack down, so maybe I'll get stronger, but I can't read it, right? But if you give them a simple mobile phone and a Bluetooth keyboard, all of a sudden they can participate just as well as their peers in class. So that, the people I work with, both on my team and the beneficiary people that we serve, I get inspiring stories daily, every day, where I'll get an email, I'll get, one of our team will go out and do a case study. I'll get hear about a secondhand conversation through one of our teammates about somebody whose life we changed through the ability to read. And that's, boy, that gets you out of bed pretty quick in the morning.
Thanks so much, all of you, for sharing a little bit about yourself and your work. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this. So, literacy education is a pretty broad topic and a lot goes into it. And so I wanted to begin by breaking that down a little bit, perhaps even on the analog side first, before we dive into how technology might transform what we do. But are we talking about early literacy skills, foundational reading skills, generally, third grade, kindergarten to third grade, where kids are learning to read? Are we talking about reading comprehension, which is, the idea that kids are now in the later grades actually reading to learn about the world around them? Brad, you also brought up issues of accessibility, and Tracy, you also brought up, being able to assess kids early on and to make sure that they get the help they need. And so let's break down a little bit those more deeply. So let's start with how we teach kids to read. Topics like phonics, phonological awareness, fluency, where they're reading with accuracy, speed, and expression. So when you look at the data, which shows little improvement over the last 30 years, you know, what are we doing wrong? Like, what have we been doing that hasn't worked? And especially in the early grades, and what are we doing to improve that?
I'd be happy to start. One of the things I really appreciate is that our nonprofit focuses on the dyslexic scholar, as Millicent said, who needs to learn how to read. Intervention should not be a life sentence. And unfortunately, in many classrooms, children are warehoused in special education classrooms because teachers have not been given the information they need to know how to teach reading diagnostically and prescriptively. Ideally, yes, we absolutely need those foundational skills so that children learn to read as a skilled reader. But as your data showed, Key, even that gap continues to grow for students if we are not articulating the science of reading research from pre-K till 12th grade, where morphology might be more important, where the literacy of any content area should be something a skilled teacher can deliver to students. Let's say, for example, math. High school student, math teachers, can you apprentice your students in the science of mathematics literacy so they can read like a mathematician, speak like a mathematician, and present their ideas like a mathematician? In a 21st century knowledge economy, to have a place at the table, regardless of the dialect we're loved in or the language we're loved in, structured literacy should be unpacked for students intentionally from pre-K till 12th grade. And when that is done well, we see a big difference. The big challenge that I'm seeing nationally is that our universities are not preparing teachers to know how to do the work. And so until we prevent teacher failure, until we help leaders understand the most important thing you will do as a leader, and I've been in the hot seat like Millicent in HISD, nobody taught me in my preparation program to become a principal or superintendent how to scale the science of reading responsibly. And that should be intentional. When that shift occurs nationally, we're going to see a dynamic ripple effect. But in the interim, people like Millicent, who's doing good work in spite of, they are the change agents that we need to lean into and learn from in terms of the application of the science, grassroots.
I love your comments. My teachers, they love when I come around and say, you know, we can't intervene our way out of this. This is a tier 1 instruction issue, and it is a training issue. We are constantly in conversations with our EPPs to really push them to embrace the science of reading. They, unfortunately, so many are still embracing just, you know, volume of text, you know, just put a volume of text in front of students, and, you know, pretty soon they're gonna catch on, you know, and all that does is just sort of exacerbate the Matthew effect that you talked about, Key, with your data in the very beginning. The reason we have that vast number of adults who can't read is because of the Matthew effect. I mean, some students can sort it out. They can, you know, they're going to get it, or they'll get the support somewhere, but the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And if we do not do something very explicit and systematic in the beginning, and all children can learn to read. You know, the data shows us a very small number of our students that enter our schools are not capable of learning to read. And it's the both and, it's the foundational skills and the knowledge building. And some students come to the table with knowledge, and they still need the explicit phonics instruction. Some students, you know, are struggling readers, and they need both the knowledge and the foundational skills. I think we went through this period of time where we were teaching skills in isolation. It seemed to be this idea that we just teach a skill and we let the knowledge fall away. And what we've learned lately is, social studies and science is critical to that knowledge building to support students as they're learning their foundational skills. It has to be a partnership. It's that Scarborough's rope. We have to have that instruction from the very beginning that focuses on building the knowledge. So it's, we're not doing activities anymore of, we're going to do a unit on cupcakes this week. We don't do that. We focus on, science and social studies, and our curricular materials are so vitally important to us to help teachers have that structure and those tools and resources. And all of our professional development is centered around curriculum implementation. So helping teachers be able to diagnose student need and prescribe the effective treatment, and embracing the fact that that's in tier 1. All of our students come to us in different places, and we have to be able to personalize, individualize, and differentiate for students so that we are meeting their needs. And that's a tough job for teachers, and we're asking a whole lot of them. So we have to provide support. We have to provide the materials, and in our district, and a lot of my colleagues, particularly in the state of Tennessee, have invested very heavily in having not just the materials, but the support that teachers require to implement those materials, because it is way different than they were trained to do. And we need to help them, because I mentioned before, they grieve the things they've created on their own. They've had to do so much work on their own, and it's so personal that there is a grieving process, but we have to help them get through that and think about the urgency we have for our students, that if we don't get it right when in the early grades, that 30%, we only have 30% proficient in second or third grade. It's going to be the same when they walk across the stage in high school. They may have the credits, but do they have the ability? My nephew Sam, he graduated from high school. He actually got into college, and he is not a proficient reader. And that is criminal. And we cannot allow that to happen in our country. It shouldn't happen to a student. That's our responsibility, and it's malpractice if we allow that to happen. So just a little passionate about that particular issue, but I think it's a real problem of practice for us in school systems to make sure our teachers have the capacity to make that change in their instruction.
Brad, I'll let you jump in here as well. But Millicent and Tracy, feel free to jump in as well. We've talked about literacy more broadly and how we teach kids to read, and then there's a population of students with dyslexia. Is the challenge similar, or are there differences in terms of what you're talking about in teaching kids to read for those different populations?
So Millicent said something that I think bears repeating, which is individualized learning. It's super important to be able to individualize the lesson for the child, and in some senses, and maybe lesson's the wrong term there. Individualize the teaching for the child, the method of teaching the same lesson that you're teaching to all kids. The method for each child might be different, and key for students with dyslexia, they see the page differently. You can't say, no, just sound it out, because they'll lose the lesson in trying to figure out the word. And all of a sudden, now they're not finishing the lesson because we haven't provided them with the tools to be able to get through that. And so if we can individualize the method, the teaching, boy, that opens those doors. And this, keep in mind, this is not an intellect problem. This is they see the page differently problem. And teachers many of them, I don't want to generalize, but many of them want to utilize the same methods to teach different kids. And a lot of times, most times, you have to use different methods to teach different kids. And so we try and put these kids in a box, and you know what? We need different boxes for different kids, and that's okay. You know, Benetech, one of the things that we're doing is using artificial intelligence to be able to transform content so that it is in a format that works for different types of students. So we'll get a request for a book. We'll either have that book from a publisher or we'll scan that book, and then we'll use AI to convert that content into, for example, STEM. We'll take those math equations and convert them into readable formats so that a student can navigate forward and backward through that math equation, instead of having it either say image in the book as the alt text, to the right is and we're talking early grade in this format, but to the right is the Pythagorean theorem. Probably third grader not doing Pythagorean theorem, but that's okay. To the right is Pythagorean theorem. This describes the relationships of the legs of a right triangle. Image. And you go, but what's the theorem, right? What's the formula? And so we're using AI to kind of pull that out and be able to navigate through that. And so that's why I'm such a believer that technology can start to address some of these challenges, where now the teacher, when they create a worksheet, if they use some of our AI technology to make that accessible, every student in their class, either Tracy or Millicent said, all means all. All students in the class can get access to that content, not just the 90%, right? And so that's excuse me, I think that's where we start to see the power of technology as the equalizer.
I want to piggyback on that remark, Brad. Great point. And what we've learned from COVID, either this is going to be a COVID crucible or a COVID chrysalis for educators. And I have determined for my organization, it's a chrysalis. We were forced to rethink our model. So we're now delivering the science of reading training to folks in Hong Kong. We never would have guessed that was possible, but it is. But it also underscores the other divide, the digital divide that I heard inferred in what Brad shared. We're working across 14 districts in East Texas. Well, when COVID hit, you know what happened. Everything came to a grinding halt. People were figuring out how to give people access to Wi-Fi by parking a bus somewhere. We got to do better than that. We must improve, because if we mean all, that means rural or urban, they must have access in this manner. And internationally, it's the same story. So if we're really serious about dynamic change, we saw the PISA data that Keith shared with us. If we want to be internationally competitive and that kind of a powerhouse, cities like Houston, where I am, 1 in 3 adults are functionally illiterate. And when we think about the dynamic of, it's not just race, it's class, right? Sure, there are microaggressions that occur. We can't ignore that. But Mark Wolf made a very important comment in chat. He said, what about the family unit? Are we embracing the family unit when it comes to literacy? Are we going one scholar at a time? Is that enough? It's not. And we know that because for dyslexic adults, we are teaching to read. I'll give you one example. We have a mother of a dyslexic scholar who's a 3rd grader. The mother came to us for services. She had been a teaching assistant for years. Well, this summer she passed her teaching certification and she is now a teacher. So the opportunities, the economic opportunities have lifted that family. And her daughter will have a different trajectory just because of what she knows about a simple view of reading personally, what she's learned, right? So how do we get bolder in our vision nationally about how do we wrap ourselves around the family unit when it comes to literacy?
We saw something really cool. I mean, I think I love that you mentioned that. So our district, we're very fortunate. We were a 1-to-1 district to begin with, and we did a lot of things to bolster our infrastructure leading up to COVID, but then subsequently during that time. And we actually have our literacy materials online. We have digital materials that we use, and more on that later. But one of the things we found, we have an extremely high English language learner population in our school system. We're a tiny little district in Tennessee, but we have per capita the second highest percentage of ESL students in our district. And our teachers noticed that when they were having class with their students, sometimes the parents would join the class for our young students, and the parents were actually learning with their students how to read. And the teachers were using technology. We used video where the students would read, and they would record themselves videoing. They would video themselves and send it to the teacher so the teacher could actually listen to them reading and do some assessment that way. We just sort of self-taught, really. And so when I think about how the technology and I think about some of the things Brad is talking about, and then I think about teacher preparation, what do we need to do? But that's a heavy lift for teachers. Number one, the curriculum that we use is extremely challenging for our teachers to learn. And I'm a big believer in assume goodwill. I assume everyone is working hard to this purpose of serving our students, in service to our students, but it's difficult and it's a challenge. And then when you layer on top of that, navigating the technology, which we're a one-to-one district because we absolutely believe that's a key to helping us personalize that learning. Personalization, meaning the individualization and the differentiation for groups of students. We absolutely believe that's the way to help teachers manage all of those different needs of our students, but they have to have the skill set, they have to have the capacity, and they have to have the materials. And so it's a lot to think about. In our district this year, we have 40 new teachers when we have, just to put it in, we have 3 schools. We have about 2,500 students in our district, and we hired 40 new teachers this year, which is the highest number of new teachers this district has ever hired since it began. And so if we have to train those folks in how to teach the science of reading and how to use our curriculum materials, and now help them understand how to use technology in a way that personalizes learning for students, that's a heavy lift for a school system. And so we need that support. Again, I go back to the teacher preparation providers and what they can do to support that. But that is absolutely what has to happen. It's just a matter of how do we support teachers and how do we have the capacity to help them to understand, because Brad, the technology that you're talking about, using the artificial intelligence that would support students, I mean, that would be phenomenal for us, for our students in our district. How do we bring that to our teachers and ultimately to our students is, the problem of practice for us. But
And can they, like a surgeon who now can use technology, who knows the science,
yes,
apply the use of it so it doesn't replace a skilled teacher?
sure. Because the teacher still has to have that knowledge of students. They have to have the relationship, the rapport of the student and the family, which is something that our teachers really pride themselves, and our administrators. We know our families. We understand the things that they're going through. And a lot of our students, to your earlier point, we've discussed, their parents are not literate. And so we cannot rely on that at-home experience, sitting around the supper table or driving in a car and having those casual conversations. We can't rely on that. So that's another layer of support that we also provide for our students.
So let me.
So, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, just two quick comments on that. First of all, the pandemic, and I don't want to get philosophical here too much. One of the great tragedies of our time. But there's also an opportunity there because it has forced the nexus of education away from the school and towards the home a little bit. And so arguably there could be more support. You're right. Sometimes the family is illiterate. But it's fundamentally changed the way the world educates students. There are something like 40 million students who will never return to school around the world because of the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic. They've had to help their, help their parents earn enough money to put food on the table, et cetera. Lots of different reasons, but it's fundamentally changed the way that we educate our students. And I submit kind of driven the center of education, not completely to the family, but away from the school as the only focus, and more out into including the family environment as well. I don't think technology has to be incredibly complex to be effective. I talked about AI. We use AI internally in order to make content accessible, but that doesn't mean you have to use AI at the student side to make sure that content's accessible. Tony put in a question in the chat, what do you do about a low resource context? And Tracy, I think, in East Texas, right? Similar types of things. Content can be accessed on an MP3 player, right? It's your $15 MP3 player. It doesn't have to be a $900, iPhone 12 teen. It can be an assistive technology device. It could be an older Android phone. It could be a PC. It could be a tablet. It could be a simple MP3 player. In the Philippines, we have what are called bookshare corners in community centers and libraries. And one of the librarians at one of our first bookshare corners actually said, boy, I just hope people use this. And she saw some students walking down the street towards the library, and they were talking with another child who was blind. And these students said, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to the library to read. And she was ecstatic because it was the first time she had ever heard that. All of a sudden, they were serving a new audience. It was a child who didn't have the resources at home, but could come to a centralized location and get access to the content and start to, learn and grow. So I just don't think the technology has to be complex everywhere. The technology can be used to ensure the content is available. Sorry, Keith, I interrupted you, but then I got passionate about it.
So I wanted to bring some audience questions and comments into this. So I'm hearing this tension where, we've got great new ideas, we've got technology that I think opens up opportunities, but then you have teachers who are already overwhelmed. They're still implementing things from 20, 30 years ago. And so we're at this moment, you talked about the chrysalis. So school districts have a ton of funding coming down the line. And you talk about, cross-sector collaboration. How do we bring families into it? How do we bring other organizations in to support this work? So if Millicent, you're in a district, and you've got this funding, what are the three things that you think are going to have the greatest impact, and where Lenoir is investing in, and would love to hear kind of where you would invest those dollars, because it's an unbelievable opportunity right now with the federal funding coming down.
Probably one of our biggest investments is, I would say, the support for our teachers. We have invested heavily in professional learning and technical partners and we're participating in networks to help us collaborate and share ideas and, have that more knowledgeable other to help us think through some of our problems in practice. But, having, we do have lots of money, and with that comes a lot of paperwork, a lot of red tape, a lot of accountability, a lot of data analysis. I mean, there are strings attached to the dollars that we receive. And so there's a lot of management around that. So to have a technical partner that's in our district, working with our teachers, establishing a relationship with teachers, helping our administrators be in classrooms, recognize good practices, give feedback, really deepen the understanding of what to look for in classrooms, and then how to give feedback that's not great job, how to give very specific, focused feedback to help teachers make change, and to help them feel like it's manageable. Because I agree, the technology doesn't have to be super fancy, but it does have to be implemented effectively. And so teachers have to learn, how to do that. We're asking them to change their practice in a lot of ways. The instructional materials are very complex. And I've had teachers say to me before, I feel like a first year teacher when I look at these materials, and whether it be literacy materials or math materials, our science materials are heavily literacy based, because our science standards are very literacy based. And our social studies, all of our core content, our materials are much different than what teachers have been exposed to in the past. And so that support has the materials themselves, and then the support for the implementation, sustained, ongoing. It's not like the old school, you get a basal, you read through it, look at all the different free stuff that comes with it, and see you later. This is sustained, ongoing support. Has probably been the heaviest investment that we've made, because we believe in our people. And we believe they're our largest investment in the district. And so everything that we're trying to do is an investment in them in service to our students. So, there are other things that we're required to do, but we're also looking at this with a focus on, we don't look at it as learning loss. We look at it as time that was lost. You can't lose something you never had. So what we are trying to focus on is figuring out ways to support teachers in tier 1 instruction to make up for lost time that students, matriculated on. We have, and we talk a lot about early literacy, and that's important too, but we also mentioned a little bit, I think Dr. Weeden talked about high school.
Yes.
We have students that had 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks of algebra 2. And in our state, they moved. So they moved on. They didn't have to repeat algebra 2 or geometry or what. And so when we think about the research telling us it's 3 to 5 years to make up for that lost time, our high school kids, they don't have that time. They don't have it with us. And so we have to figure out the best way to serve them, to support them, to fill that learning time loss as well. So that's where our investment has been, very much in our materials and our people and instruction, with that philosophy of acceleration and not sort of wallowing in, or I've said it's like the La Brea tar pits. It's like we were stuck and just mired up in all of the things that went along with the pandemic. And we are very much trying to do everything we can, and all of our investments are moving us forward. And that's what we're trying to do.
I'd like to piggyback on what you said, Millicent, because you said something very important that I wish someone had said to me when I was assistant superintendent in the 7th largest district in the country. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And that is, you need trusted shoulder partners who have the expertise to free your thinking about 3 variables you can control. You said time. I've never heard it put quite the way you did before. You lost that variable. You're taking control of it. We can control how we invest time. Talent. How are we leveraging talent? The force multiplier are leaders who are knowledgeable and know how to support the solid classroom instruction that should be happening. They know what it looks like. And coaches, Who gets good at anything without coaching? Well, remember the race to the top funds years ago? That's when I was making decisions about a whole lot of money. I invested in literacy coaches. It was a good move, but I didn't have a plan for sustainability. That's where I missed it. So how do you build that into the system? And third is funding and resources. As you said, what are we investing in? Are we investing in things that are not grounded in the science of reading research? If so, it's wasted, squandered money and opportunity. So when you have someone there to help you look at what you're doing that's working, map your resources, time, talent, and funding, and then strategically abandon. Abby, I heard you loud and clear in chat. What's not working? Districts are an initiative overload. To create the space for the new, we must prep the system for change. And that process allows us to strategically abandon what's not working. So our poor teachers and principals say, oh, I'm clear, this is what the focus is. And the silo effect is also a problem. Special ed is over here doing their thing. Curriculum's over here doing their thing. EL's doing. We need to be at the same table, mapping resources together so that we're working smarter, not just harder all the time. That's the number one problem I see when I get to be in the space of a superintendent in their cabinet. And they create the space for that free thinking. It's just remarkable what happens. And we see double-digit growth, dynamic change, and sustainable change that sticks. That's crucial.
And we do have, I think that's so important, is to have that strategic plan. We have a very detailed strategic plan. We know, and everyone in the district understands our outcomes. And it's interesting what you said. I've been in a large urban district, and getting all those players at the table is pretty difficult to do. I have really enjoyed being in a small system where we are able to have all of those supports at the table at the same time, working together, and making sure that all of our teachers, all of our folks understand the vision and the role they play. Our big thing is in our strategic plan, everyone needs to be able to see themselves in the plan and understand what their role is in moving the district forward toward our goals. And so we work really hard to have that stakeholder engagement in our community, across all of our schools, and that's helped us a lot. But there's so much work still to do, and having that technical partner there to help you think strategically and push. Sometimes when you're in the work so close, you need somebody that's sort of kind of pushing you and making you think outside the box, because you do sort of get within yourself if you're not careful. So I do appreciate that. Yes.
Tracy, in the lead up to this and the preps for this, you talked about building the capacity in organizations so that they are ready to benefit. Like a lot of times, school districts will invest in solutions, but the system is not ready for those solutions to be used well. And so I think this idea of readiness to benefit is something that a lot of organizations need to think about versus just trying to find the silver bullet. I think the other I think important idea is just this idea of coherence across the system. I think and it starts with literacy instruction. Like even for school districts who say, hey, I do phonics, and then hey, I do knowledge building stuff, but what you find is it's all incoherent. Like got one program for phonics, they've got another program for ELA, and then they've got another program for do vocabulary in a completely disconnected way. And so how do they bring greater coherence to that system so that the limited time that students have now, they can make sense of it all versus feeling like they're being pulled in 15 different directions.
Yeah, and I think that the other piece of that is when everybody's not sitting at a table, therefore the district isn't firing on all cylinders, and the ones who get left behind are the students. We see it with students with disabilities a lot, where you have the special educators and the procurement office, and they're never talking to each other. And yet, if the procurement office asks for accessible material from the publisher or the distributor, all of a sudden the book is a better book, not only for a student with a disability, but for everyone. And so it, little things like making sure everybody's communicating and at the table, avoid lawsuits. There was a lawsuit, right, just got settled at Clark County, which the district lost because the student wasn't getting the appropriate education. But if the materials had been there, if the district had been talking and everybody sitting at the table, those students would have been addressed appropriately. So I just think, I think that's a wonderful comment about making sure everybody is there.
Well, on that note, I know we are running a little bit over time, so we have to stop there. Fortunately, as I mentioned, this is the first in a series of 3 events. And so we've covered a lot today, and jumping around a little bit. And so I think what we're going to try to do over the next 2 events is get feedback from the audience around where you want to focus our time over the next couple of events. I know we're certainly going to look at take a deeper look at inclusive and equitable education, and so that's going to be a major topic. But we can build in questions that you have coming out of this, so that we can help to address some of those questions. And then, so those 2 events right now, they're tentatively scheduled for February and May. And so we look forward to having you join us then. And please keep an eye out for more details on those events coming up. And just to wrap up, we'll be posting a recording of this conversation on our LinkedIn page, and more info about the upcoming events. And if you'd like to request more information or partner with Benetech or speakers to support ongoing work, please follow up with us on LinkedIn. So on behalf of our audience, Tracy, Brad, Millicent, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.